We likewise view Europe and its nations as an integral part of any solution to end the war. Together with our European partners, we will continue to prioritize Ukrainian, in other words, European security. To that end, we stress that any future peace agreement should be founded on credible and robust security guarantees to preclude the recurrence of war and ensure an independent, democratic, and sovereign future for Ukraine. Thank you.
I thank Her Excellency, Mrs. Papadopoulou, for her statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Syed Tariq Fatemi, Special Assistant to the Prime Minister, Minister of State of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Secretary General. I thank the Secretary General for his insightful briefing. I echo his call for peace and the need to bring the protracted conflict in Ukraine to an end. I welcome the Presidents of Ukraine, Greece, France, and Slovenia, as well as the Foreign Ministers of US, UK, and Guyana to this meeting, and the Ministers and high-level representatives of other member states. Mr. President, the conflict in Ukraine has raged on for over 3.5 years. It has impacted the regional and international security landscape. Continued fighting has caused immense human suffering. The repercussions of this conflict extend far beyond its geographical expanse. Increased polarization and geopolitical tensions, disruption of supply chains, food and energy insecurity, global inflation, and much more. The Global South has borne a disproportionate brunt of these consequences. Mr. President, we have consistently maintained that there is no military solution here or in the foreseeable future. Every bullet fired, every rocket and drone launched, every life lost moves us further away from peace. We call upon the parties to demonstrate restraint, scrupulously adhere to the international humanitarian law, and make meaningful strides towards de-escalation. Mr. President, given the complex historical context and the intricate nature of this conflict, the logic of singling out third countries and placing this blame elsewhere is not conducive to the pursuit of peace. Mr. President, a glimmer of hope did emerge at the start of the year to pursue the path of dialogue and diplomacy. The Security Council adopted Resolution 2774, mourning the tragic losses of life, reaffirming the Charter's principle to peacefully settle disputes, imploring a swift and end to the conflict, and urging a lasting peace between Ukraine and Russia. Pakistan supported this resolution. Pakistan also welcomed the ensuing political engagement, including direct talks between Russia and Ukraine, facilitated by the US President himself. It generated optimism for an early end to this conflict. We certainly hope that these efforts will bear fruit. Our collective priority must be to silence the guns and create conditions for a negotiated settlement. As an ardent advocate for peace and a firm believer in the power of dialogue and diplomacy, we will support all endeavors aimed at resolving the issue peacefully. That was also the spirit of Resolution 2788 adopted by the Council in July. Mr. President, the path of peace is the only responsible choice. A sincere and meaningful dialogue, which addresses the security concerns of all sides, is anchored in the principles of the UN Charter and international law and respects the relevant multilateral agreements can help secure peace, which is both just and sustainable. Pakistan will continue to support all regional and international efforts that pave the way for a peaceful resolution of this conflict. I thank you, sir.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Fatemi. Okay. So I thank His Excellency Mr. Fatemi for the statement. Thank you. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Javier Martinez Achav Vasquez, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Panama.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, Excellencies. Panama would like to thank the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, for the information provided regarding the conflict in Ukraine. We welcome the presence of the various countries who join us once again today to address the situation regarding the conflict between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. Since the beginning of the Russian invasion in 2022, Panama has reiterated its concern over the breakdown of international peace and security, as well as the dire consequences of this war, which, first and foremost, affect the civilian population. We are entering the fourth year of this war, whose origin, stemming from the invasion of a sovereign state, has been the subject of numerous unsuccessful meetings of this Council. In this regard, Panama, respectful of international law, rejects any violation of the sovereignty, political independence, and territorial integrity of Ukraine, and we condemn the use of force by one state against another. We reaffirm the primacy of these principles, not as a rhetorical exercise or an abstract aspiration, but rather as a moral and legal obligation incumbent upon the entire international community, principles that must be safeguarded and defended wherever they are under threat. The recent violation of the airspace of Poland and Romania, as well as yesterday's meeting called in response to the incursion of Russian combat aircraft into Estonian airspace, are troubling signs of the escalation in the conflict, which undermines the recent diplomatic efforts promoted by the United States with the support of European countries to bring an end to this war. Panama reiterates that dialogue is the only path to the peaceful resolution of this conflict, that with the necessary political will, it is possible to establish the conditions that guarantee respect for international obligations and safeguard peace and security. All of this within a broad framework of freedom and the sovereign equality of states, with full respect for their sovereignty and territorial integrity. This war, the most devastating in Europe since 1945, with a humanitarian crisis that has led to high numbers of civilian and military deaths, injuries, disappearances and displacements, and which has also driven an unprecedented increase in global military spending, this war must come to an end. The effects of this tragedy are not confined to a single region. Its humanitarian, economic and political repercussions are global in nature and are felt in all areas. For 80 years, Panama has upheld the principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations and in international humanitarian law as essential pillars for peaceful coexistence between peoples. our country has maintained that respect for these norms is the greatest contribution that we can offer humanity in order to preserve future generations from the scourge of war. Today, we reaffirm the validity of their normative value and the preservation of their integrity and universality as indispensable elements to guarantee the stability of the international order and respect for human rights. For Panama, multilateralism constitutes an indispensable tool for success and an example of effective international cooperation which, from our own experience, we can say has proven its effectiveness in promoting peace, resolving conflicts peacefully, and helping to confront the common challenges of the present and of the future. Mr. President, only with the will of each member state of this Council and the readiness to transform rhetoric into actions for peace can we demonstrate the effectiveness of this United Nations body and our ability to bring peace to peoples suffering the consequences of war. Panama expresses its hope that all parties involved will act with determination to achieve, without delay, a just and lasting peace, one that respects the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine and the human rights of all those people affected. Thank you very much.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Acha Vasquez for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of China.
President, I thank Secretary General Guterres for his briefing. Allow me to make 4 points. First, dialogue and negotiations remain the fundamental path forward. Recently, positive momentum has emerged in the dialogue and negotiations on the Ukraine crisis, with key parties holding a series of engagements and talks. However, significant differences remain in their positions and demands. The parties to the conflict should intensify their efforts, demonstrate political will, show flexibility, and take seriously and address properly each other's legitimate security concerns, so as to reach a comprehensive, lasting, and binding peace agreement at an early date. Second, promoting de-escalation is a pressing priority. At present, there are no signs of a halt to hostilities on the ground. The parties to the conflict continue to carry out large-scale drone and missile attacks, and substantial quantities of arms and ammunition continue to flow into the battlefield. China has consistently called for adherence to the 3 principles of no expansion of the battlefield, no escalation of the fighting, and no fanning up the flame by any party. We hope all parties will play a constructive role in de-escalating the situation and in creating the necessary conditions for a ceasefire and the cessation of hostilities at an early date. Third, alleviating the humanitarian crisis is a moral imperative. Civilians are the greatest victims of war. Each additional day of conflict brings an additional day of suffering to the people. The parties to the conflict should exercise restraint, strictly abide by international humanitarian law, and refrain under all circumstances from attacking civilians and civilian infrastructure, and avoid the use of WMDs. The international community should step up its humanitarian assistance efforts in order to help those affected by the crisis overcome their difficulties. Fourth, containing the spillover effects of the crisis is a shared responsibility. The crisis has taken a big toll on global economic development, with developing countries bearing the brunt. The international community should strengthen cooperation on issues such as food, energy, finance, trade, and the protection of critical infrastructure in order to jointly maintain the stability and smooth functioning of global supply chains. Abusing unilateral sanctions and long-arm jurisdiction under the pretext of the crisis does not contribute to a political settlement. On the contrary, it creates new problems and should therefore be rejected. President, since the first day of the crisis, China has been upholding an objective and impartial position, calling for a ceasefire and cessation of hostilities, and advocating for peace talks towards a political settlement. Guided by the 4 shoulds put forth by President Xi Jinping, we have maintained close communication with parties concerned, sent our special envoys for shadow diplomacy and
发起成立乌克兰危机和平之友小组，汇聚和平呼声，促进和平共识，推动 和平努力。中方愿同国际社会一道，继续为推动危机的早日政治解决发挥建设性作用。谢谢主席。
I thank the representative of China for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we thank you for convening this briefing on Ukraine at the request of Slovenia, Denmark, Greece, France, and the United Kingdom. I welcome President Volodymyr Zelensky's participation at this meeting. I thank the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, for his comprehensive and sobering briefing. We also welcome the participation of ministers from neighboring countries in this meeting. For nearly 4 years, this Council has called for an end to a conflict that continues to inflict devastating harm on civilians and critical infrastructure. Since 2022, nearly 14,000 civilians, including over 700 children, have been killed and more than 35,000 injured. Sierra Leone has consistently condemned the disregard for sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the peaceful settlement of disputes enshrined in the UN Charter. Article 2.3 obliges member states to resolve their disputes by peaceful means while refraining from the threat or use of force. The neglect of these principles and international law in this conflict is troubling, as is the repeated use of force and the Council's failure to secure a ceasefire. This conflict will not be resolved on the battlefield, but through a negotiated ceasefire and peace agreement that addresses the legitimate concerns of the parties. Mr. President, in light of the foregoing, I wish to make the 4 points. First, international humanitarian law must be respected. Attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure, whether in Ukraine or Russia, violate the principles of proportionality, precaution, and distinction. Second, the conflict's toll on children and women is particularly grave. Thousands of children have been killed, injured, or traumatized, while many women face disproportionate impacts on their livelihoods. We call for the immediate return of Ukrainian children and women's inclusion in peace and recovery processes. Third, humanitarian needs remain immense. Over 12 million people require assistance, with millions displaced internally and across Europe. The destruction of infrastructure, contamination of land by mines, and the onset of winter make unhindered humanitarian access and sustained funding more urgent than ever. Fourth, good faith ceasefire and peace negotiations must be pursued. Confidence-building measures such as prisoner exchanges and the return of children should be built upon. We commend the efforts of Turkey in this regard. We are concerned by violations of the airspace of Poland, Romania, and Estonia, which risk wider escalation. The Security Council must support political dialogue to prevent regional conflagration. The conflict has already severely disrupted global economic supply chains, resulting in shortages and price increases of critical food and fuel supplies. Mr. President, Sierra Leone continues to call for dialogue and diplomacy in line with Article 33 of the Charter as the only path to a just and sustainable peace. We urge negotiations toward a peaceful settlement that respects Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity while addressing the legitimate security concerns of all parties. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Somalia.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank the Secretary General for his briefing on the worrying developments in Ukraine and the wider region. We meet today as the war in Ukraine enters yet another difficult chapter and a conflict whose origins stretch back years and whose consequences have rippled far beyond its borders. The latest developments only reinforces the urgency and complexity of the crisis. In that regard, I would like to make the following points. First, we are deeply troubled by the ongoing escalation of attacks impacting civilians and essential civilian infrastructure. Hospitals, schools, and homes must never become casualties of war. Protecting civilians, particularly the most vulnerable among them, and preserving essential infrastructure are obligations enshrined under international law. Our delegation reiterates that all parties to the conflict must respect and uphold these principles without exception. Second, we must acknowledge that there can be no military solution to this conflict. My delegation welcomes the ongoing peace efforts spearheaded by President Trump to bring an end to this protracted conflict. We believe that every opportunity for peace and diplomacy, however brief, must be seized and built upon. We take note of the upcoming planned meeting between President Trump of the United States and Ukrainian President Zelensky on the sideline of the United Nations General Assembly, which we hope will advance dialogue and diplomacy. We also commend the humanitarian mediation efforts, including prisoners of war exchanges, and progress on these issues can build the trust necessary for broader engagement. Third, we are concerned by the recent reported military developments in the wider Eastern European region, which could escalate into a broader war in the region. These incidents underscore the escalating nature of the conflict and highlight the urgent need for a comprehensive de-escalation and utmost restraint by all parties to prevent a wider conflagration. Constructive and good faith engagement remain essential, and only through sustained diplomatic efforts and willingness to compromise can bring durable and just peace be achieved. Mr. President, in closing, my delegation reaffirms its unwavering support for all efforts aimed at addressing the root causes of the conflict and achieving a just and lasting peace in accordance with the United Nations Charter. The people of Ukraine and all those affected by this crisis deserve a future and a path to peace founded upon peace, security, and dignity. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Somalia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Спасибо, господин председатель. Крайне прискорбно, что члены Совета Безопасности вынуждены сегодня тратить время и присутствовать на заседании, инициированном нашими европейскими коллегами, исключительно по случаю очередных нью-йоркских гастролей одного всем нам известного бывшего актера. По этому случаю их здесь набилось как в метро в час пик, и каждое выступление, которое мы услышали и услышим, лишь перепевает предыдущие и не имеет никакого отношения к правде. Никакой добавленной стоимости для дела установления мира на Украине наше заседание, разумеется, не принесет и станет лишь очередным позорным эпизодом той ярмарки лицемерия, которая представляет собой подача украинской тематики европейскими государствами. Европейские спонсоры режима Зеленского хотят, чтобы Совет Безопасности ООН жил, как и они, в некой параллельной реальности, в которой Украина не проигрывает на поле боя, теряя город за городом, а украинские граждане выстраиваются в очередь за тем, чтобы погибнуть в бессмысленной мясорубке за западные геополитические интересы. В этой извращенной картине, которую нам сегодня пытаются навязать, Украина – это островок демократии и свободы, а ее лидер-узурпатор, нарушивший все свои предвыборные обещания и бросивший в застенки тысячи сограждан, пользуется поддержкой всех украинцев, которые и в выборах-то, дескать, не видят необходимости, раз у них такой замечательный президент. Те, кто по каким-то причинам европейским кукловодам Украины в этом подыгрывает, должны понимать, что они по сути становятся соучастниками преступной манипуляции, цель которой – не допустить долгосрочного, справедливого и устойчивого мира на Украине, подразумевающего в том числе выработку таких гарантий безопасности, которые исключили бы угрозу нового конфликта в Европе. Это, по сути, сговор, направленный на то, чтобы украинцы по-прежнему тысячами погибали в бессмысленной братоубийственной бойне, которую западные недруги России готовили много лет, рассчитывая обескровить нашу страну, подорвать ее безопасность и экономический потенциал. За скобками при этом сознательно оставляются вопиющие для любого цивилизованного государства уродливые явления, которые не потерпело бы ни в своей стране, ни по соседству ни одно уважающее себя правительство. Нам всем, в частности, предлагается закрыть глаза на то, что обезумевшие от русофобии и вседозволенности своих сюзеренов киевские марионетки и не думают отказываться от гонений на русскоязычных граждан Украины, запрещая им, вопреки Конституции собственной страны, говорить на родном языке и учить ему своих детей. У нас на глазах людей под страхом смерти и преследований заставляют отказаться от своей идентичности, от своих духовных и исторических корней. А все так называемые европейские демократии этому рукоплещут, безосновательно утверждая, что Россия якобы хочет растоптать идентичность украинскую. У нас никогда не было такой задачи. Это огромная наглая ложь, продвигаемая киевским князьком для запугивания и оболванивания мировой общественности. Нам предлагается забыть, как обнаглевший от безнаказанности ненацистский режим в Киеве, пришедший к власти в результате спонсированного Западом нарушения устава ООН госпереворота, расстреливал беззащитных людей на юге и востоке Украины из танков и орудий, сбрасывал на них бомбы и заживо сжигал в Одесском доме профсоюзов, унижал и издевался над ними только за то, что они русские, и отказались принимать человеконенавистническую идеологию киевского режима. А потом его 7 лет под ширмой Минских договоренностей вооружали до зубов, снабжали разведданными и готовили к войне с Россией, как в этом признался ряд отставных европейских политиков, имевших к этому непосредственное отношение. А еще нас призывают не замечать, как на Украине по-прежнему возвеличивают тех, кто в годы Второй мировой войны вместе с нацистами уничтожил сотни тысяч евреев, поляков, русских, цыган, тех же украинцев. Как европейские партнеры Киева стыдливо опускают глаза, когда видят на телах обучаемых ими националистических украинских боевиков свастики и другие нацистские и ненацистские символы, которые запрещены в их собственных странах. Господин председатель, для тех, кто пытается заставить весь мир мыслить в этой извращенной парадигме, история начинается лишь в феврале 2022 года. Они не хотят вспоминать о нарушенных обещаниях не допустить расширения НАТО на восток и о неделимости безопасности. Хотят стереть из памяти то, что они сотворили в Киеве в 2014 году. Выдергивают из устава ООН один единственный принцип об уважении территориальной целостности государства, забывая об их суверенном равенстве, о невмешательстве в их внутренние дела и о праве народов на самоопределение. Они видят проблему только в действиях, которые стали ответом на их собственные шаги. На ходу подменяют международное право так называемым порядком, основанным на правилах, которые они сами же придумывают и навязывают другим. Украинский кризис – это прямой результат их действий и их шагов, предпринимавшихся много лет, несмотря на все наши предупреждения и призывы остановиться и сойти с курса, который ведет к катастрофе для этой страны. Сегодня же, когда эта катастрофа очевидна всем, кроме разве что спасающего свою шкуру и свои наворованные миллиарды главаря киевского режима и тех, кто привел его к власти, они пытаются подорвать усилия, нацеленные на установление долгосрочного и устойчивого мира на Украине. Название этой страны стало нарицательным не только для поголовной коррупции и тотального бесправия, но и для вопиющих двойных стандартов, которые коллективный Запад и подконтрольные ему СМИ демонстрируют в украинском контексте. Нигде в мире, ни в одном конфликте так последовательно не игнорируются бесспорные нарушения международного гуманитарного права со стороны киевского режима, использующего мирных жителей в качестве живого щита и размещающего средства ПВО в непосредственной близости от жилых кварталов. Это приводит к трагедиям, связанным с падениями на жилые дома обломков или промахнувшихся противовоздушных ракет, которых в иной ситуации не случилось бы, поскольку ВКС России, как уже неоднократно подчеркивалось, наносит исключительно высокоточные удары по объектам, относящимся к военно-промышленному потенциалу киевского режима. Кроме того, в большинстве случаев они являются ответом на удары украинских беспилотников по мирным объектам в российских городах. Целенаправленные обстрелы укронацистов жилых домов, школ, детских садов и больниц, которые на Западе пытаются не замечать. К сожалению, им в этом подыгрывают и в секретариате ООН, где энергично подхватывают любые утверждения из Киева и игнорируют печальную статистику, озвучиваемую российскими властями. Видим в этом вопиющее нарушение статьи 100 Устава ООН, предписывающей сотрудникам Всемирной организации беспристрастность. Чести Антонио Гутеррешу и его подчиненным подобная линия не делает. Господин председатель, всем нам сегодня понятно, что в ЕС и НАТО сильно влипли с антироссийским украинским проектом, запутались и заврались, и не очень представляют, как выпутаться из ситуации, в которую сами себя загнали. Раньше всех начали прозревать в Вашингтоне после прихода к власти новой американской администрации. Однако, вместо того, чтобы присоединиться к усилиям, направленным на установление мира, в Брюсселе и союзных столицах по-прежнему, по инерции или сознательно, раскручивают маховик войны, последовательно и без каких-либо оснований лепят из России образ врага, который неминуемо на них нападет, стоит ему только разделаться с Украиной. Сегодня эта партия войны потеряла сон, всячески стараясь подорвать итоги и понимания, достигнутые в ходе встречи президентов России и США на Аляске месяц назад. Закатывает истерики, в том числе и в этом зале, в связи с бездоказательными утверждениями то о залете в Польшу якобы российских беспилотников, то о якобы пролете над Эстонией российских истребителей. Подобная промывка мозгов и зомбирование населения, стремление повесить на Россию свои недоработки и ошибки и острейшие экономические и социальные проблемы, с которыми столкнулись европейские общества в результате собственных непродуманных санкционных мер, сравнимы разве что с обработкой немецких и итальянских обывателей накануне Второй мировой войны. А потом все эти манипуляторы, получив очередной горький урок истории, будут разводить руками и утверждать, что не осознавали последствий своих действий. Обнадеживает, что не все в Европе готовы следовать этим губительным путем. И появляется все больше политических сил и лидеров, которые отвергают войну и конфронтацию в Европе и агитируют за развитие взаимовыгодных и равноправных отношений с Россией. Мы выступали за такой сценарий с самого начала. Господин председатель, контуры будущего мира на Украине нам всем понятны. Как очевидно и то, что представления киевского режима о том, как он мог бы выглядеть, не имеют никакого отношения к реальности и лишь обрекают новые тысячи не желающих отправляться на фронт украинских граждан на бессмысленную гибель. Только вчера в эфире одного из украинских каналов один из тамошних пропагандистов посетовал, что у украинцев на улицах отлавливают много, но они, цитирую, быстро заканчиваются. В этом циничном заявлении вся суть киевского режима. Вы подписываетесь вместе с ним над подобной незавидной участью оставшихся в живых граждан Украины? Если да, то нам не о чем с вами разговаривать. Если же вам они не безразличны, мы ждем вашей поддержки и искренней работы вместе с теми, кто пытается нащупать контуры реалистичного, долгосрочного и устойчивого мира, который остановил бы эту войну, начатую преступной киевской кликой в 2014 году. Мы не отказываемся ни от каких переговорных форматов, но выступаем исключительно за серьезный, субстантивный и незашоренный разговор. Не отказываемся мы и от переговоров с Украиной, несмотря на крайне сомнительную, мягко говоря, легитимность ее нынешних властей. Оптимальный формат для этого уже найден. Это переговорная площадка в Стамбуле. Обо всем остальном можно будет говорить только после того, как там будут достигнуты значимые экспертные наработки. Пока до этого еще, к сожалению, далеко. Господин председатель, в завершении хотел бы напомнить о пророческих словах, произнесенных на полях недели высокого уровня Генассамблеи 2 года назад польским президентом Анджеем Дудой. Цитирую: «Украина, как утопленник, тянет нас всех на дно». Конец цитаты. Сегодня подобными утопленниками стали уже очень многие из тех, кто выступил в этом зале. Если вас устраивает такая бесславная участь, можете ничего не делать и продолжать в том же духе. Если же нет, то работы предстоит много. Мы к ней были и есть готовы. Теперь ваш черед сделать этот выбор. Благодарю за внимание.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Petro Pavel, President of the Czech Republic.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, it is an honor to address again the Security Council, and I thank the Korean Presidency for this opportunity. The Czech Republic is proud to be among the founding nations of this esteemed organization and remains fully committed to upholding the Charter and the rules-based international order. For more than 11 years, these principles have been under direct assault by Russia's ongoing aggression against Ukraine, which continues to suffer daily attacks against civilians, infrastructure, and even foreign diplomatic mission. Russia, for everyone to see, does not seek a peace. Let me state it loud and clear that Russia continues to violate basic principles of the UN Charter, territorial integrity and national sovereignty through its naked attempt to land grab and expansion of sphere of influence. The recent land swap proposals and continued military escalation highlight its disregard for peace and international law. While Russia pretends readiness for dialogue and negotiating process, it systematically breaches the very basic principles of peaceful coexistence among the nations and continues to play for time. And it will continue to do so for as long as the international community allows it. We condemn in the strongest terms possible the recent incursion of Russian drones into Polish airspace. And it was not an isolated incident. It forms part of Russia's deliberate strategy to intimidate its neighbors and test the limits of international law. Czechia stands in full solidarity with Poland, Estonia or Romania and commends their swift and decisive defensive response in the face of this blatant act of aggression. After many years of war, Ukrainians are the ones who want peace in their country the most. Therefore, Ukraine must be a key actor at the peace talks. Any peace agreement must be based on international law, including the UN Charter, and be subject to Ukraine's consent. The aggressor must not be rewarded for unlawful use of force. Accountability and full reparations for the damage caused are essential for a just and lasting peace. Ladies and gentlemen, there can be no doubt Russia's aggressive behavior cannot be appeased. It must be faced with strength and a resolute global response. We call on all members of the international community, and in particular on China, to assume their responsibility and stop enabling this divisive war of aggression, which risks escalating further and undermining global peace. Thank you for your attention.
Thank His Excellency Mr. Pavel for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Peter Pellegrini, President of the Slovak Republic.
Mr. President, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, first I want to thank the Republic of Korea for putting Ukraine on the agenda of this week's Security Council meeting. As a neighboring country, Slovakia is very concerned about the situation in Ukraine. Even though Slovakia and Republic of Korea are geographically distant, we both recognize the wide-ranging effects of this war. Its consequences extend beyond Ukraine and affect global peace, security and justice. 80 years ago, the UN Charter was created to prevent anyone from imposing their will on their sovereign neighbors or taking territory by force. We must stand firmly against such actions. We have given the Security Council the important responsibility to maintain peace and security and to uphold the Charter. Yet, the war in Ukraine has been ongoing for over 1,300 days. This is not just a European issue. It concerns us all. For a long time, we believed that meetings like this would not be necessary. We must consistently defend the UN Charter to ensure that such behavior does not happen again in the future, anywhere in the world. It is our duty to do everything we can to end this conflict. Ladies and gentlemen, as a country with a war right at our border, Slovakia sees the heavy toll it takes: civilian casualties, destruction of infrastructure, and violations of humanitarian law. This war has serious implications for my region and European security. Despite direct talks between President Trump and President Putin in Alaska, there has been no ceasefire or peace agreement. Although there were hopes for diplomatic talks and negotiations, the war continues. Russia refuses to stop fighting, forcing Ukraine to defend itself, its people, and its borders. Recently, there have been troubling incidents involving our allies. Just 2 weeks ago, Russian drones violated the airspace of Poland, our neighbor and ally. I want to express my strong support and solidarity with Poland, as well as with Estonia and Romania. An open door to negotiations should not be seen as a weakness or a call for more violence. It is not surprising that measures are being taken in response to threats to our shared security. Slovakia has consistently called for a quick and peaceful resolution to the war in Ukraine, including direct talks with Ukraine, the country most affected. We are ready to help and support guarantees for a lasting peace that aligns with the UN Charter and resolutions. President Trump has tried to step up and to move from discussions to actions, and he is still trying. The whole international community should continue to pursue peace resolutions to the war in 3 points. First, end of fighting. Second, mediated negotiations between Ukraine and Russia for a peace agreement. And 3, security guarantees for Ukraine, those that would sustain the cause of peace in Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, His Excellency Mr. Pellegrini, for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Alexander Stubb, President of the Republic of Finland.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'm addressing the Security Council on behalf of the Nordic states, Sweden, Norway, Iceland, Denmark, and Finland. And I'm probably given the honor to do this because Finland shares a 1,340-kilometer border with Russia. Now, the Security Council has had Ukraine on its agenda for the last 11 years, with a few results on paper and even less on the ground. At the same time, it's quite clear that the General Assembly has overwhelmingly, on several occasions, condemned the aggression of Russia. The Council was entrusted with the primary responsibility to maintain international peace and security, and I think it's quite safe to say that we have failed in that. Ordinary Ukrainian civilians, and actually Russians as well, are paying a high price for this. Now, quite often I hear words that we need to eradicate the root cause of this war. The root cause is very simple. And the root cause is that Russia is not abiding by this, the UN Charter. It's really as simple as that. It is trying to violate the independence, the sovereignty, and the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Now, the UN Charter lays out the principles that underpin multilateralism. These principles, in my mind, are universal. Every country has taken a sovereign decision to uphold them when joining the UN. They are the minimum common rules at the core of the whole international system. We heard that in a speech from the Secretary General today, and we heard it from the President of the General Assembly. Now, the prohibition of the use of force, sovereign equality, and territorial integrity are fundamental to our coexistence. These rules are violated daily by the Russian Federation in Ukraine. Russia's war of aggression violates the very essence of who we are. It violates the very essence of the UN Charter. If we allow borders to be changed by the use of force, it will set a precedent with global implications. And I look around the room here today, I think most of us have had the experience throughout our history of war as a means of expansion. We've either been the victims thereof or we've been the aggressor. And I always felt that after 1945, we should have all learned our lesson. And many of us probably believed that after 1989, that lesson had been learned and we'd be moving towards some kind of eternal peace. But the truth is that when we don't nurture the international institutions that are the foundations of the peace, like the United Nations, we fail. I think a just peace is in our shared interests, and the solution is quite simple. It's in two phases. The first phase is a ceasefire. Ukraine has accepted it. The United States has proposed it. Europe supports it, but there's only one country that doesn't want a ceasefire, and that is Russia. And the second phase is very simple. You go into peace negotiations, and peace negotiations can last a long time, but they are indeed the only way we can get out of this. It's in our interest to ensure that the peace is sustainable and without a relapse. President Zelensky has repeatedly called for a ceasefire and high-level negotiations, and Moscow's response has been more missiles and drones. I think the message to my Russian colleagues around this table is it's time to talk about peace. But there are too many people dying as a cause of this conflict. I personally think that today could be a game changer for many reasons. One of them was President Trump's post on Truth Social, which I didn't think left any space for interpretation. It was a clear message that it's time to end this war. And I think Secretary Rubio noted that President Trump is running out of patience. Now, of course, Russia is not operating alone, so we urge all states directly or indirectly supporting the invasion to stop. We live in an era with increasing geopolitical tension and hardening rhetoric in international relations. I think we need to be clear. Might does not make right. Borders cannot be moved by force. Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, Donetsk, Luhansk, Crimea, and Sevastopol are Ukrainian. Membership in this council comes with power, but it also comes with responsibility. Please use that power to stop the killing and pave the way for a just and lasting peace in Ukraine, for the sake of all of us. And let me finish by quoting my mentor, President Martti Ahtisaari, who was a big friend of the United Nations and received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2008. He said that what humans begin, they can also end. Please end this war. Thank you very much.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Stubb for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Alar Karis, President of the Republic of Estonia.
President of the Security Council, Excellencies, I speak on behalf of Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and my own country, Estonia. We thank the Presidency for convening us at this crucial moment for international peace and security. Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine constitutes one of the gravest breaches of international law and the UN Charter since its adoption 80 years ago. Despite repeated calls by the General Assembly to stop the aggression, Russia continues its brutal assault on the Ukrainian nation, which began with the illegal occupation of annexation of Crimea in 2014 and continued with a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. This is totally incompatible not only with the status and responsibilities of a permanent member of a Security Council, but also with those of any UN member state. The scale of human tragedy Russia has inflicted in Ukraine is unimaginable. Millions of homes have been destroyed and families torn apart. Tens of thousands of children have been abducted and deported to Russia, subjugated through so-called re-educational programs with their roots and identity are systematically erased. We continue to call on Russia to grant full access for the UN and independent monitors to the occupied territories, to the prisoner of war camps in Russia, and to the areas under occupation. Russia must return the deported children. Russia must release all civilian detainees. In response to the recent peace effort by the United States, Russia has only intensified its campaign of terror against Ukrainians. Russia has not held back even from targeting and damaging diplomatic facilities in clear violation of the Vienna Convention. The recent violations of Estonian, Polish and Romanian airspace by Russia are yet another escalation and a stark reminder that Russia's aggression threatens not only Ukraine, but the security of the entire region. On Monday, the Emergency Security Council meeting was convened to discuss the grave violation of Estonia's territorial integrity by Russian armed fighter jets. Allow me to thank all 50-plus countries who called out Russia's action as dangerous, reckless, and in violation of international law. President, Russia is not interested in peace and security, neither in Ukraine nor in Europe. In March 2025, President Zelensky agreed to a 30-day ceasefire proposal. That was 6 months ago. Russia, on the other hand, has shown no intention of agreeing to a ceasefire, let alone a lasting peace. Russia's objective remains unchanged: subjugation of all the Ukraine and the reshaping of European security order to satisfy Russia's own neo-colonial and imperial ambitions. The only viable way forward towards a ceasefire and ultimately towards lasting peace in Ukraine is to collectively increase international pressure to force Russia to just and lasting peace in Ukraine. Ukrainians have courageously defended not only the country, but the core principles enshrined in UN Charter: sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. These principles are non-negotiable and cannot be compromised, as they form the very foundation of international law-based multilateral system. The Baltic States' message is clear. Russia and its leadership must be held accountable for the crime of aggression, for war crimes and crimes against humanity. There can be no lasting peace without accountability. Without accountability, there can be no justice. And without justice, there cannot be lasting peace. Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania will stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. In accordance with Article 51 of the UN Charter, Ukraine has the inherent right to defend itself against Russia's armed aggression. Defending Ukraine's freedom means for us defending the sovereign equality of all member states, large and small, the core principles of which the United Nations was founded. We call on the Security Council to act. The cost of inaction is borne not only by Ukraine, but by the credibility of the international community as a whole. We urge all UN member states to increase pressure on Russia by strengthening sanctions or providing greater political, military and humanitarian support to Ukraine. Impunity, appeasement and further concessions would only embolden the aggressor and would lead to new crimes and escalation by Russia. Therefore, it remains our common duty to support Ukraine in its legitimate pursuit of comprehensive, just and lasting peace, a peace rooted firmly in international law. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Karas for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Antonio Costa, President of the European Council.
Mr. President, first of all, I would like to thank South Korea Presidency to convey this meeting. Ukraine is fighting for the very principles of the United Nations Charter: sovereignty, territorial integrity, the respect of the international recognized borders, the right to choose its own destiny. We cannot rewrite history. This war started with an unjustified and illegal attack by Russia. There is the only one root cause to this war: Russia's refusal to accept Ukraine's right to choose its own future. Peace in Ukraine is not just Ukraine's interest, is not just Europe's interest. It is the interest of the global community. If we accept Russia's invasion of Ukraine, no country will ever be safe. The pursuit of peace must be the top priority of the global community. The European Union will continue to work to end this war of aggression and to support Ukraine in every way. A ceasefire, to which Ukraine has already agreed to, is the first step. And I call on Russia, a permanent member of this Security Council, to agree to come to the negotiation table, to stop the killings, to stop the destruction, to stop threatening the neighboring countries. I call on the international community to be actively engaged on peace efforts in full respect of the United Nations Charter. The European Union supports President Trump's efforts for peace, and I would like to see China, also a permanent member of the Security Council, contribute towards a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. Ladies and gentlemen, to achieve an end to the aggression, the European Union will continue to apply pressure on Russia through sanctions. To ensure a lasting peace, the European Union, in the context of the coalition of the willing, is ready to contribute with concrete security guarantees to Ukraine and to fulfill the aspirations of Ukraine people. We will continue to support Ukraine on its path to full membership in the European Union. Mr. President, the time for peace, it's now, and it is now time for Russia to stop this aggression. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Costa for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Pedro Sanchez Perez Castejon, President of the Government of Spain.
Excelencias, distinguidos colegas, señoras y señores, agradezco a la presidencia coreana haber convocado esta sesión sobre Ucrania, porque una de las prioridades del Consejo de Seguridad tiene que ser que la paz llegue a Ucrania de una vez por todas. Y lamentablemente, tras 3 años y medio de conflicto, seguimos atrapados en la misma encrucijada, sin avances significativos hacia una solución duradera. Ya se ha dicho en reiteradas ocasiones, pero creo que es importante no olvidarlo, la agresión rusa contra Ucrania constituye una violación inaceptable del derecho internacional y de los valores compartidos por el conjunto de la comunidad internacional. Esta agresión es especialmente alarmante porque ha sido perpetrada por un miembro permanente de esta sala, del Consejo de Seguridad de Naciones Unidas, el órgano encargado, supuestamente, de velar por la paz y por la estabilidad global. Si permitimos que la fuerza y la coacción sustituyan al diálogo y al respeto mutuo entre naciones, estaremos sentando un peligroso precedente que pondrá en riesgo la estabilidad de las fronteras y también del orden internacional, especialmente en Europa, pero también en otras regiones del mundo. Permítame subrayar con la mayor claridad que cualquier acuerdo de paz que se alcance debe estar firmemente anclado en el respeto al derecho internacional y a la Carta de Naciones Unidas. Por tanto, no se pueden aceptar soluciones que impliquen la legitimación de la violencia o la alteración por la fuerza de las fronteras reconocidas internacionalmente. Si renunciamos a estos principios, no solo estaremos traicionando la confianza de los pueblos que representamos, sino que estaremos abriendo la puerta a nuevas crisis y a conflictos en el futuro. En el caso de mi país, de España, desde el primer día hemos sido una firme defensora de la libertad y la seguridad de Ucrania. Formamos parte de la coalición de voluntarios, hemos enviado miles de millones de euros a Kiev en ayuda militar, también humanitaria. Hemos entrenado a más de 8.000 soldados ucranianos y hemos acogido a más de 240.000 desplazados ucranianos en nuestro país. Y Ucrania ha demostrado, además, miembros del Consejo de Seguridad, en reiteradas ocasiones su disposición a comprometerse con un alto el fuego y a buscar una solución negociada a esta guerra. Sin embargo, la respuesta del presidente de la Federación Rusa, de Putin, ha sido una y otra vez la escalada de la violencia, el lanzamiento de nuevos ataques, ignorando el llamamiento de la comunidad internacional y agravando el sufrimiento de una población, la población civil, inocente. Los recientes bombardeos dirigidos deliberadamente contra la población civil en Ucrania, las infraestructuras esenciales como hospitales, escuelas, redes eléctricas, redes de suministro de agua, son una prueba clara de que Rusia no tiene en este momento voluntad alguna de llegar a la paz con Ucrania. Las violaciones del espacio aéreo europeo de estos últimos días son absolutamente inaceptables y la comunidad internacional debe actuar con determinación y con unidad, utilizando todos los instrumentos políticos que tenemos a nuestro alcance, los diplomáticos, los humanitarios, para poner fin a esta tragedia y sentar las bases de una solución sostenible. Durante esta semana de alto nivel, reafirmemos juntos nuestro compromiso con la paz, con la justicia y el respeto al derecho internacional, porque no podemos permitir que la indiferencia o el cansancio nos paralicen. Debemos recordar que la defensa de la legalidad internacional, de los derechos humanos, repito, de los derechos humanos, es una responsabilidad compartida y que solo a través de la solidaridad y la cooperación podremos garantizar un futuro seguro y digno a las generaciones venideras. Muchas gracias.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Sánchez Pérez Castejón for the statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Rick Frieden, Prime Minister of the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the Benelux countries, Belgium, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and my own country, Luxembourg. I thank the colleagues, Prime Ministers of Belgium and the Netherlands, to be here with me to underline the importance we as Benelux countries attach to the peace and security in Ukraine. For over 3 years now, we and the overwhelming majority of United Nations member states have been calling on Russia to end its illegal war of aggression against Ukraine. Russia must stop this war immediately, as already stated forcefully also by the International Court of Justice in March 2022. In this war, Russia is the aggressor, and Ukraine has a legitimate right to defend itself in line with Article 51 of our UN Charter. Last February, this Council adopted a resolution imploring a swift end to the conflict and urging a lasting peace between Ukraine and Russia. As a permanent member of this Council, Russia has a special responsibility to uphold the UN Charter, international law, and global stability. In reality, Russia is challenging the very principles of the United Nations. Therefore, Russia's aggression not only undermines Ukraine's security and Europe's security as a whole, it affects the entire international community. Mr. President, for years, the people of Ukraine have bravely stood up against daily indiscriminate bombings and killings by Russia's armed forces. Countless civilians have died. Entire neighborhoods and cities have been destroyed. Thousands of Ukrainian children have been abducted. These kids must be brought back immediately. The Benelux countries reiterate their strongest possible condemnation of this war started by President Putin. Our message to Russia remains clear and simple. Stop attacking Ukraine and withdraw your troops. The Benelux countries underline their unwavering support for Ukraine. We remain steadfast in our support for comprehensive, just, and lasting peace in Ukraine, in line with our Charter. Any peace must be just, not imposed, not partial, and not forgetting the victims and the suffering endured. There must be accountability for all the crimes committed. We welcome the peace efforts led by President Trump. Despite intense diplomacy by the United States, Ukraine, the European Union, and other partners, however, there are no signs that Russia's goal of subjugating Ukraine has changed. On the contrary, while Ukraine has repeatedly stated its readiness for an immediate ceasefire and for meaningful peace negotiations, Russia keeps targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure. Russia's reckless behavior was evident in the last 2 weeks when it repeatedly violated NATO airspace. These dangerous provocations, which are violating international law, demonstrate that if Russia's aggression remains unchecked, it is bound to repeat itself and expand. Mr. President, the relentless war of aggression waged by the Russian Federation has only strengthened our resolve. With our allies and partners, the Benelux countries will continue to pursue coordinated political, military, humanitarian, and financial support to Ukraine in order to bolster its efforts to defend itself, rebuild the country, and pursue a just peace. To our Ukrainian friends, we reiterate our unwavering commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders, and our full solidarity with the brave people of Ukraine in their fight for freedom. And to Russia, we say, it's time to stop this war, for peace, for your children and ours. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Frieden for the statement. And I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Antonio Tajani, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of the Republic of Italy.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The Italian goal is very clear: a just and lasting peace. Our priority is the respect of the international law. We stand, of course, with Ukraine, fighting to defend their freedom and sovereignty. This is a key priority at the United Nations, in the G7 and in the European Union. I want to make this point very clear. We are not at war with Russia. Our goal is to bring Russia to the negotiation table for a just peace. We are fully convinced that a path to peace is still possible. Like Pope Leo said, we cannot abandon the hope for peace. We fully support the efforts of President Trump to reach a negotiated and fair solution to the conflict. To this end, we urge Russia to increase its attack and follow up on the summit in Alaska. It is time to start direct negotiations with Ukraine. Italy strongly supports this political process. We all need to support it. This is the key to end this conflict. Je souhaite maintenant m'adresser directement à mes collègues des pays partenaires. Il est temps d'unir nos efforts en vue d'une paix juste. Vous trouvez toujours une oreille attentive à Rome. En même temps, nous espérons que la Russie pourra bientôt envoyer des signes concrets de coopération. Dans ce contexte, les récentes violations de l'espace aérien polonais, roumain et estonien sont inacceptables. Ce sont de mauvais signaux, mais nous devons éviter l'escalade. Nous restons préoccupés par la sécurité de la centrale nucléaire de Zaporizhzhia. Nous devons continuer à soutenir les efforts du directeur général de l'AIEA, M. Grossi. Toute solution durable au conflit doit inclure de solides garanties de sécurité pour l'Ukraine. Il est également essentiel qu'aucune décision concernant l'Ukraine ne soit prise sans l'Ukraine. L'avenir de l'Ukraine est dans l'Unión Européenne. Italia está en primera línea en la reconstrucción de Ucrania. La Conferencia para la Recuperación de Ucrania que organizamos en Roma en julio recaudó más de 10.000 millones de euros. Desde Roma enviamos un mensaje al mundo. Creemos en el futuro de Ucrania, todos juntos. Seguiremos prestando especial atención al patrimonio cultural de Ucrania. Un ejemplo, Italia contribuirá a reconstruir los monumentos emblemáticos de Odessa. Lo haremos poniendo a disposición nuestras mejores excelencias. También debemos poner en el centro la dimensión humanitaria de la guerra. Este es un mensaje muy fuerte que me reafirmó personalmente el Papa León en un encuentro oficial hace pocas semanas. La paz significa también justicia. Debemos garantizar la rendición de cuentas de los responsables de los crímenes y la plena reparación para las víctimas. Debemos proteger a los niños ucranianos que deben volver a sus familias y a su patria sin más demoras. La liberación de los prisioneros de guerra, junto con el regreso de los niños ucranianos, son prioridades cruciales. Nosotros trabajamos con vosotros. Italia puede hacer todo lo que puede. Defendemos la soberanía de Ucrania y trabajamos por la paz. Trabajamos por un encuentro Ucrania y Rusia para concluir este encuentro con una paz durable. Gracias.
His Excellency Mr. Tajani for the statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.